Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. And I am here with Doug Ernst, the author of the Soulfinder series. You may have seen some of my reviews on that. I'm a big fan of Doug's work, and today I want to pick his brain a little bit about what he's doing and how he goes about doing it. So, Doug, thanks for coming. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about your latest project? I believe that's Soulfinder Volume 4.
Sure. So your viewers are familiar with Soulfinder, but for those that are not, it's my series on combat veteran exorcists that are tasked essentially with battling this demon called Blackfire and his minions and his cult following until the end of time. So I'm working on the fourth one right now. Or actually, I should say artist Matt Weldon is. The writing was done long ago. And he's inking it right now, and then we're going to get it colored. And hopefully by this summer, we'll have maybe the soft cover out. And then last year I got the hardcover for volume 3 out a few months later. It looks like that's going to be the same process again, just with how printing hardcovers goes. So that's well on its way. And then I'm well into volume 5 right now, writing it. It's the plot and everything's all good to go. It's just a matter of finding time throughout the day to sit down and get what's in my head onto the page.
Sure, sure. So I know you're working full time for Iconic Comics now, right? Or with I know you're working a lot with Tim Lim and Mark Pellegrini on some of their other projects. So is that also part of your daily process, or is that more come and go over time?
Yeah, well, I'm definitely in contact with Iconic on a regular basis. I talk to Tim and Mark on a regular basis. There's merch ideas that comes up. We have shows that we're going to this year. So I believe we're going to West Texas again. We did that last year, Bell County Comic Con, obviously. And then there's a couple other shows that, as far as I know, that everything is good to go, but you don't like to kind of like talk about it until you get your plane tickets and
Right.
everything's good to go. So there's multiple shows that we'll be doing again this year. And yeah, I worked at a newspaper for like roughly a decade. And then at some point in time, I was just like, I think I have enough of a reader base where I could literally just do the Soulfinder books. And as long as I keep putting out decent books, I have enough readers where I could continue to just put out a new book every year. So obviously I'm not selling like millions of copies or anything, but I don't care about that. I just care about being able to put out the next book and try to make it better overall quality than the last, whether, in terms of art, writing, and then the actual product itself.
Right. Right. Okay, good stuff. So if I can ask, why did you choose an exorcist as the protagonist for your big story?
Sure. So that goes back to my dissatisfaction with the mainstream industry and what I was reading in comics at the time. I felt as though a lot of heroes that I grew up reading, whether it's Spider-Man, Captain America, or whatnot, they weren't the same characters. They were fundamentally different. I mean, with Spider-Man, you could get to the deal with the devil sort of things.
Hmm.
And I didn't recognize the characters that I grew up reading. And it wasn't that like they just naturally changed. It was like, no, they're just trying to make Spider-Man Deadpool or something along those lines. That's not who he is. That's not who Peter Parker is. And you would have creators that would uh, people that I have fundamental disagreements on, they would talk about it like Spider-Man was all that mattered. Like Peter Parker doesn't matter. It's just
Mm.
whoever has a mask on, that's a Spidey mask. And so I was like, I'm tired of this moral relativism junk. I just want good versus evil. And so I was like, okay, well, we start with how do we just get good versus evil? So demons, you can't get any more evil than that. There's no mistaking it. And then I was like, okay, well, who would logically go up against these demons? A priest. And then it gets into write what you know. I know that's a cliche, but I'm like, okay, well, I'm not an airplane pilot, and I don't want to spend the next 5 years researching, aviation. But I am a military veteran, and I am a practicing Catholic, so I have a good knowledge base to, start with. And now I can do, the research that I need, but I'm not starting from scratch. And so then I fused the combat veteran exorcist sort of type thing to the priest. And I was like, oh, now these guys, that opens up all sorts of different genres. I can tell. I can get into the espionage. I could do a straight up military tale. I can do a very like intimate tale of just an exorcism with a priest and one other person. There's so many different things that I can do by having the military and then the Catholic Church, which has its own, whether you like or dislike the Catholic Church, whatever you think about it, it's got a very rich history that you can mine for creative content. So I was like, this just offers so many different possibilities.
Okay. Yeah. And you've already explored a lot of those possibilities in some very interesting ways. I know that Black Tide, that was kind of a military story because it was all on submarines. And then you had kind of the Black Ops aspect of it in Infinite Ascent. Do you have a pattern that you want to follow to how you explore these ideas, or do you just sort of pick whatever is in the forefront of your mind and work on that? Is there a plan, or are you just sort of going wherever inspiration takes you?
Yeah, so there's an overarching sort of story that I want to tell that will take place over the first 6 volumes. So obviously, I had to tell Redder's origin, and then his mentor is a Vietnam vet, Father Crane. So I was like, okay, I want to tell these 2 stories for sure. Then I got to establish like then once they have their job, once they become a soul finder, I want to tell one solid story with each of them where they're kind of doing their thing, they're feeling that out or whatnot. I also need a story where I cement these guys as a team. There's a detective Chua. So that was Black Tide. That was really about cementing these 3 men as a team together. And it was also actually part 2 of a 3-part story arc with the villain William Neville. But I was like, okay, I got to cement the guys as a team. Then volume 6, I want to tell a tale where Redder's he's got his sea legs under him, like literally, and Crane, he's been established. All right, we've got an emotional connection to all these different guys. Infinite Ascent focused in many ways on Shua. So I got people emotionally invested in each of these characters. Now volume 6 is like the big finale where they're going to take on William Neville in the ultimate clash. And so then I also wanted to go back and tell the origin of William Neville. So I'm doing things out of order, but there's a puzzle that ultimately you can put it together in any way you want, but you could have fun with it. So you could read volume 4 and then volume 1 and then volume 6 and then volume 2, and it doesn't matter because they're self-contained tales. But they all, when you put them together, when you read all 6 of them, then you will see the full picture and things will make sense. So I was trying to give people their own sort of creative freedom with reading it, but also having things tie together in a logical manner. So I was juggling a lot of things, and when you juggle all of these chainsaws at once, if you drop one, bad things could happen. But I'm just like, hey, I'm just going to go for it.
Sure. Well, I've been enjoying it so far, so I think you're doing pretty well. Your characters, are they inspired by people you know? Are they inspired by historical figures, or are you just sort of working them out as you're writing the story?
Uh, so Father Redder is more of just sort of an ideal, sort of like almost like a Captain America type character. He's obviously flawed. He has his own history. He has some issues with his family. He has obviously his own military baggage that he brings to the table. But there's not like one individual. I would say that I do try and honor the military with these stories. So I served in the 90s. I got out in 2000, but I had a lot of friends that stayed in. And obviously, afterwards, 9/11 happened, Iraq, Afghanistan, and all of that. So you keep in contact with your friends, and then some of them literally die, and they don't come home. And sorry, I got to keep my composure here, but and so you want to be able to honor their sacrifice. So that was what I did, a short story called War Cry that takes place at Arlington Cemetery. And that was my attempt in many ways to honor the guys that were in Iraq and Afghanistan. It takes place in section 60. And then even the gravestone at the end, I think Matt got it in there. It says Tucker I had a really good friend who was in the military, and he is no longer with us. He actually didn't die in service. He died afterwards, but that's another story. So yeah, so I am trying to honor the military. I'm trying to honor my friends that were I was peacetime soldier and they were wartime soldiers. And so I don't know. I struggled for many years. I had like all sorts of bizarre guilt things with like, am I not going in because I'm a coward? But I'm in this relationship with this woman and I love her. And am I just telling myself that? She ended up becoming my wife. So, but I was just like, you know what? I think my purpose in life is to honor the troops, both through my writing at the newspaper. I did a lot of military type stories and military tech stories, and then creatively through this this series. And so you could, someone who's an atheist or agnostic would be like, you're just trying to rationalize your decisions or whatnot. But that is the conclusion that I came to, is I wasn't meant to be an infantry guy for 20 years. I was meant to tell stories that bring people into the combat veteran's world and his struggles and what he overcomes.
Okay. One thing that I have observed while reading Soulfinder is that you take your character's faith very seriously. You just mentioned, maybe to an atheist or an agnostic reader, that's not as important. And one thing I really appreciate about the way you write, especially Fathers Redder and Crane, is that you make it clear that they are men of a very unshakable faith, but you still manage to show that, like, for a lot of Christian authors, there seems to be a viewpoint that once you have your Christian faith worked out, everything is happy. And these are people who have an unshakable faith, but they still face the trials of the world as well. And I think we actually get a better sense of their faith through the way they face, these difficulties and struggles that the world throws at people. Is there a is there a role model you base that on? Do you set out to test these things, or do you just write the stories as they come and say, well, a man of faith would react to this situation in this way? How do you go about doing that?
Yeah, so I first try and start off with a universal question that anybody could resonate with. Why do bad things happen to good people? Black Tide was really sort of a metaphor for anxiety and depression, the abyss, and having friends and family and faith to be able to get yourself out of the abyss. There's multiple ways that you can do that. So some people thought it like they wanted the whole character of Nebel in one story, but it was really just about depression and anxiety, and having those connections to the community and people close to you to be able to get through those sorts of things. So those are universal things that everybody, it doesn't matter if you're an atheist or you're a Muslim or whatever you are, you might still have anxiety, you might still have depression, and you might lean on your family members and your loved ones to try and get you through just a day or an hour or a minute or whatever it is. And so, but like you were saying, these people, just these characters just happen to be priests, and this is how the way they see the world. But I'm also trying to write in a way where I take people of other faiths or no faiths just as seriously. I don't want to denigrate them. I don't want to dunk on them and be like, yeah, I'm Catholic, boom, and just like slam the ball in their face. And it's like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to write these multi-layered stories where no matter how deep you want to dig into it, hopefully you get something out of it. And if they dig deep enough and they're like, you know what, let me check out this Catholicism thing, they might find something that they're like, huh, and then they keep going. But if they don't, and they just want to see Father Redder take on giant spider type demons or snake type demons, like, then they can do that. So again, just like with the puzzle, and they could read it in any way they want in terms of the order, I'm also trying to write it in a way where what they put into it is what they're going to get out of it.
Okay, that's fair. Um, so you write priests, and you're Catholic, but I presume you never studied theology or for the priesthood or anything like that. So, what kind of research do you tend to do when you're writing these stories about priests and exorcisms and things like that?
Right. So, like I was saying, I have my base. I was a cradle Catholic, and but I wasn't. Actually, I would say I'm still not a good Catholic. I'm trying my best, and I definitely stumble and I fall. But yeah, for many years, I actually was just kind of spiritual driftwood, with like Catholic slapped on top of it, like a label. And so, but over time, I started reading, Fulton Sheen and Thomas Merton and Augustine and Aquinas, and so then I was like, oh whoa, like I was given the Crayola version of Catholicism when I was a kid, and I didn't even really understand my own faith, and there was people that were trying to do their best, but on some level, I feel like I was almost set up for failure because I didn't understand my own faith. And I was like, no, this is the real faith. And I was getting this hippie sort of thing. Friends are like flowers, beautiful flowers that grow in the dark. That had nothing to do with like Jesus. But anyway, so there's the base, but then with the characters being priests and being exorcists, then I had to start doing research. And so, looking into minor exorcisms, books by Father Ripperger, who is a very famous exorcist. I actually did a co-interview with him on a buddy's channel not too long ago, the No Heroes podcast, which is on YouTube. And then reading like random books. So this was the one that I just recently read, Diary of American Exorcist by Father Rossetti. But then that's the other thing is some of these books, they deal with exorcisms and the demonic on a cursory level. Like this is an interesting book, but it's not what a Father Ripperger did. So there's like some where it's just like you're just kind of interested in it, like what is what's going on here. This is like a good 101 book. But then a Father Ripperger he was I think he's actually a clinical psychologist, and he has stuff that is super dense, and I have to read it 3 and 4 and 5 times because he's brilliant and I'm a doofus of sorts. And so you have to go much more slowly with his work. Or Father Malachi Martin's Hostage to the Devil was another one. I love that book. Sometimes they come up with there's the new book, the Pope's Exorcist or whatever, with Father Amorth, who if you read Father Amorth's books, they're very good. They're excellent. And then I see this trailer and I'm like, oh no, they're just going to Hollywood it up. And this is not going to be Father Amorth, and people are going to get the wrong idea. And actually, I was talking to Timothy Lim recently, and he sent me a screenshot where they were marketing it. And they were like, it's The Exorcist meets, I forgot what the heck they were talking about, but it was something ridiculous. And I was like, oh, like, I don't want to see this movie. I might see it, but once they go there, you're like, no, the books are where it's at. Hostage to the Devil by Malachi Martin is genius. I think the guy probably has a 150 IQ, and you don't even need to be religious you could read it just on a horror type, like nonfiction book level if you don't believe in God, and you could be like, this is absolutely terrifying. But then you could understand where Catholics are at least coming from, even if you disagree with them. You're like, this is really sharp writing.
Yeah. So this just occurred to me as you were talking about it, but I know you said that we're never going to see Redder have like a crisis of faith, but do you think you would ever do a story where he has to come to loggerheads with like maybe an atheist psychologist about someone who needs an exorcism or something like that?
So with Volume 4, actually, Father Crane, when he was a young soldier, he was actually agnostic. And I actually get into the origin of Father Blatty, Tim and Mark's character as well. And he was more of sort of like the founding fathers, where they believe in this sort of general idea of God, some of them, but they're not necessarily like, I think it was Thomas Jefferson who like took out all the supernatural stuff from the Bible. I
Right.
might get that wrong. It might be another another founding father, but
I'm pretty sure that was Jefferson. Yeah.
yeah. So I have characters like that, and then the demons themselves, I try to actually give them very convincing cases as to why they're making the case to Redder or Chua or Father Crane that like, hey, this guy might exist, but he kind of hates you. And so I try and like play on. That's the thing is, so these characters believe in God, but sometimes if you're wearing the crown of thorn or you have your own cross to bear, a cross can be obviously incredibly painful and excruciatingly painful. And so I'm trying to put these guys in a situation where it's so painful that they're essentially, they want to scream to God that take me off this cross. Like I've dealt with enough pain, like take me off. And if God is not taking them off that cross, then at some point in time you start to wonder logically, why is this guy not taking me off the cross? Like, seriously, I proved my point. Like, what more do I have to do? And so it's not even so much that they're questioning that God exists, but why do I have to bear this specific cross? And why does it hurt so much? But again, I try and put very convincing cases into the demons' mouths where people like, so I can see some people would be like, that is interesting. But ultimately, when I tie it up at the end of the story, I try to make it very clear that Father Redder's way and Father Crane's way and in Infinite Ascent, the decision that Chua made was the right decision. And the other road is a road that leads to absolute failure and isolation and hopelessness and despair.
Hmm. Okay. Well, that detour aside, you did mention that we're going to see Crane when he's younger in Vietnam just then, and I am curious as well. Research wise, did you have like a specific part of U.S. involvement in Vietnam that you researched, or were you just looking to set a story there? Did you have a specific maybe campaign or battle that you wanted to set your story around? I geek out about history and just about every aspect, so I'm fascinated your approach there.
Sure. So with that one, I was like, okay, well, I'm starting with a Vietnam vet. And actually, it's kind of hinted at. He was an army guy in Demon's Match, and he was an infantry guy. And so from there, I'm like, okay, I want to put him in a situation where it kind of shows that he has the mettle to become a soul finder. Obviously, he's in Vietnam and he's an infantry guy. He's proven himself quite a bit. But then I'm like, no, what's something that I haven't really read about too much or I haven't seen movies about? You see the Platoon or name the Vietnam movie, Apocalypse Now and all of these sorts of things. But I'm like, what haven't I seen? And so I was always fascinated by the Vietnam tunnel rats, the guys that had to go into the cave systems. And so that was a very elite group because for various reasons, not many people want to crawl into these tiny spaces where you can't really see anything. There's booby traps. People are putting poisonous scorpions and poisonous snakes in there. It's you versus another guy, and all you have is a pistol. And so I was like, and they're just very cramped, confined spaces. And I was like, no, that's what I want to explore with this one. And Crane's actually a tall guy, and the tunnel rats were actually tended to be shorter. But then I rationalized it, and I was like, no, I'm just gonna say like, no, that nobody wanted to do this job. And even though he was a tall guy, he was like, I'm still gonna go in. It's gonna be even tighter for me, and I'm still gonna go in there. And I was like, metaphorically, that still sort of works in that Jordan Peterson-esque where going into the darkness, going into the chaos and bringing order out of the chaos, like those sorts of things. You can make that same analogy or metaphor with Black Tide. And I was like, so now he's still going underground. He's going into the chaos. He's willingly doing that. And then when he, comes back above ground, hopefully, if all goes well, he has completed his mission and he has brought order to chaos, sort of thing.
Right. Okay. That's cool. Yeah, I had a writing professor in college who was in Vietnam, and he knew a couple tunnel rats, and he made them sound like just the toughest people he'd ever met. It was very fascinating. Okay. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your collaborative process. I know you've worked with two different artists, Timothy Lim and Matt Weldon, and I was curious, like, how much of the creative visual storytelling process is you, how much is them. I know you have some very clear symbolic language in your stories, transitions to the spiritual plane where the spiritual warfare takes place. um, what part would you say is you and what part is them in that, putting together that process and those ideas?
Yeah, I've really been blessed to work with both Tim and Matt because they both work differently, but they both get me. So um, Tim, when I worked with him, and this is years ago, so I know he's evolved as an artist, and he just keeps getting better and finding his own sort of um, style or whatnot. I don't know how he would define it, but it's as time has gone on, it's like Timothy Lim or something along those lines. But
Right.
when we did Demons Match, that was my first script that I ever wrote. And when I first wrote it, Tim and Mark got back to me and they're like, "This is good, but it's a movie script. It's not a comic script.
Hmm.
And so you need to rewrite it." And so then I had to break it down panel by panel. So initially I was just like, all right, I'm going to have these scenes and I'm going to let the artist sort of go at it based with here's the dialogue and here's the scenes, go for it. But they're like, no, we want you to break it down panel by panel. And then depending on the artist you're working with, they might want more and more. So I could see a situation where they'd be like, no, if you want a cup on the desk, you need to write that a cup isn't, not that Tim's like that, but there's like a spectrum of how much the artist wants you to put in per panel or whatnot. So I try to strike that balance where I give them the essentials that need to be in there. But then I always say, like, you're the artist, you're the visual guy. So if there's something that I missed, or you think that you could do it visually better, or you could quote unquote plus it, or however you want to, Disney talked about plussing things, then I trust you. You're a smart guy, and so do that. And so with Matt and Tim, I was like, all right, so on this page, I've got 5 panels, but it's like that old game show, Name That Tune. If you think you could tell the exact same story of this page in 3 panels, as long as it works with the dialogue, I don't care. And I actually don't think there's ever been a situation where they changed the panels. Maybe like Matt did, like instead of a panel 1, 2, he did like 1A, 1B type of thing where it's like a panel and then like something along those lines. But they almost never really like mess with the page layouts that I give them, or in terms of panels. And then Matt's super creative, so you can give Matt, I'm exaggerating here, you can say like, hey, there's 13 panels on this page, and Matt will find a way. He's so gifted that he'll find a way to make it work. But I try not to do that. I try to kind of stick within like 4 to 6 panels. Sometimes it'll go higher than that. But then even when I do that, it's usually, like I said, there's a 1A and a 1B where they're very small little things going on. Yeah, I try to give them as much creative freedom as possible because I want them to be invested in the story. I always tell Matt, like, I want you to be psyched to do a Soulfinder story. I don't want you to see it as a task and you're like, oh, I got to do this Soulfinder page today. So whatever I can do on my end to make things exciting and fun for Matt, whether it's, treading new creative ground with things that he's never drawn before, or whatever, just giving him as much information in the script as possible. So sometimes there's certain things where I was referencing some art some Dante type art for volume 5. This is not going to be the right page, but so I had to include like the artwork and say like, Matt, this is the artwork that I'm thinking of that will inspire this particular panel. And then so I'll link to it. And so he doesn't have to do all sorts of research on his own. I try and do as much research as possible, and then I'll just put hyperlinks right there for him. So, but I do want it to be a true collaborative process between myself and the artist. And that's what I'm going for, because if Matt's happy, then he's going to stick around for another tale. And if Matt, I know he's such a good artist that he's got people vying for his attention and his time all the time. So it's like, and he has his own IPs that he wants to develop. And so my job is to make him feel as happy and connected to the material as possible, and that he's contributing in a way where he's like, no, I want to do this. I want to do this for many years. And because you don't find artists like Matt and Tim very often, and you don't want to burn that bridge.
Right. Okay. One last question. I know that Soulfinder is a concept with tons of potential, and you clearly have a passion for it, and you're doing quite well with it. Have you any other ideas for stories you might like to explore through comics? Like sci-fi, maybe an actual superhero story, anything like that? Or are you just going to work on Soulfinder for now?
Yeah, there are 2 more properties I would like to develop, but Soulfinder is just taking up so much of my time that it's one of those things where like, oh man, because that's the thing is there's certain like merchandise that I'm working on with Soulfinder, and some of that I was mentioning on a stream yesterday. It literally takes a year or more to get the wheels in motion, especially if you're doing with specialty sort of items that maybe there's not very many people that do what you want them to do, and they're making time in their schedule to work with you. And that's a fragile relationship because they can ditch you at any point in time.
Yeah.
And so, when it comes to Soulfinder, and then going on, traveling and going to these shows with Tim and Mart and Matt and Bill Williams and Eric Canetti and guys like that, it's one of those things where it's like, oh man, this is much more, it's taking up much more of my time than I realized. Not in a bad way, but it's like, no, if I want to do another property, I know that for me personally, I need to be like reading books, and I need to be doing research where I'm highlighting things that interest me and underlining it, and then trying to just think about it. And luckily I'm in a place where I can just sit some days and literally just think. I know it sounds like weird, but it's just like I could literally just sit in front of my laptop or my computer for an hour, like 2 hours, and be like, how do I put this together, and how do I put it together for like the long term? And I don't have somebody over my shoulder like when I was at the newspaper saying like, hey, you got to get this story done. You got to get this story done. Oh, we need you to stay until 7:30 or 8 o'clock tonight. It's the midterm elections, and so I don't have to deal with that anymore. And that's a blessing in and of itself, that I'm just in a position where I can just take my time.
Right. Yeah, I've had those nights where I get off work and I come home and I just sit down here and I was like, I was going to do all this other stuff. I just find myself thinking and, maybe pulling a book off the shelf to reread something. And yeah, I understand that does eat up a lot of that time when it doesn't feel like you're moving a project forward, but when you actually sit down to do something, it really does help, doesn't it?
I was telling my wife recently where there are times where it freaks me out because so my wife has her job, and every couple of weeks she's bringing in a paycheck, and it's like feels like someone's contributing to the family or whatever. And I used to have that when I was at the newspaper, but now I have long-term projects where you don't see, like, obviously I'll get a quarterly report from Iconic, and I will get paychecks or royalties or whatever at those points in time, but that's quarterly. So there are these periods of time where I'm not, money is not necessarily coming in, and I'm, so I would have to wait for that. Or if I don't do a show until July, then it's one of those things where, but I know, so luckily my wife is patient. She's like, oh, I know Doug's reading these books and he's underlining them. And maybe I'll read a book. Maybe it'll take me like, I'm just making up a number, 5 hours or 10 hours. And out of this entire book, there's like two things that stood out to me that are going to end up in the actual script. But I feel like those are very valuable insights to the character, or they contribute it in some sort of way. And in my mind, it's a diamond in the rough. And I found it and I got it. And I would not have had it if I didn't take 5 or 10 hours out of my time to read this. And that's something with like Marvel years ago. I felt like they were writing Tony Stark, but they didn't even know Business 101. And they were just like, oh, I know enough because, I pull up a couple websites every day and I read them and over breakfast, so I could write Tony Stark. But you don't know the first thing about being an entrepreneur. So in my mind, a writer's writer, they spend time reading, and they spend a lot of time reading, and they know when they don't know something, and they don't have to be the smartest guy in the room. They could admit, I'm a doofus. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm dumb. I have found, I was telling my wife the other day, so there's somebody who was helping me with some merch, and I was talking to them, and I just straight up said, like, hey, I'm a moron. I'm ignorant. You are the expert, and I will defer to you. I have found that if you just tell people you're stupid and you need their help, they want to help you. It's when you actually like start walking around like you own the place and you know everything that they're like, who is this guy? So I try to humble myself as much as possible and tell these people that are working with me, like, I'm dumb, particularly on this issue, and I need your help. But I will do whatever you tell me to get this done. And as long as they see that, oh, when I give Doug a task, he does it, and he does it in a timely manner, they will continue to help you. And then you could get cool merchandise or whatever you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, Doug, you've been very generous with your time and your thoughts. Thank you for coming on. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about Soulfinder?
I really just want to thank you for inviting me. I like having intelligent conversations. And so when somebody who's sharp reaches out to me and they want to have a serious discussion about writing, the craft of storytelling, it's actually rarer than you might think. That you have someone that fits the bill in terms of they're sharp dude, and they care about the craft of storytelling, and they want to talk to you about it. So I appreciate that. But then, yeah, again, just people, if they want solid stories and solid artwork, check out Iconic Comics, Arc Athena, Common America, Black Ops, Punchline, and obviously Soulfinder. And again, thanks for everything. I appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. Well, I will include a link to Iconic down below. You'll be able to find Doug's stuff there. There's a lot of other good stories there. People, let Doug know what you thought of his talk about storytelling in the comments, and I will talk to you all later.